Hi, it's Patrick. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use Dreamweaver Creative Cloud to take a basic website and add a CSS style sheet. Cascading style sheets changed a bit in Dreamweaver Creative Cloud, so hopefully this will be helpful for beginners. So more specifically, the idea is how do you take a page like this and create a page like this using CSS. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File, New. I'm going to hit HTML. I'm going to make sure HTML5 is selected. I'm going to hit Create. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to title it. And I'm going to save it. So I'm going to save it as 502. I'm going to save it in a folder called 502. Alright, so I'm going to give myself some space here between my body tags, and I'm in split view. And I'm assuming that you have a basic idea of HTML and CSS. So I'm going to go up here, I'm going to go to Insert, and I'm going to start with a div. And I like to start with a div with an ID equals container. And this serves as a box or a container that I'll put all of my tags in. So I'm going to delete that text it had in between, and I'm going to make some space, and now I'm going to add some HTML5 tags. I'm going to go to Insert Structure, I'm going to add header, hit OK, I'm going to add some space, I'm going to add a section tag, and a footer tag. I'm going to now get rid of some of this text just so I can see exactly what it is. I'm going to save it again. So in this case, I know the text that I want for the body of my page. So I'm just going to basically take this text and add it to my page. So I'm going to start with my header. I'm going to add my section. And now I'm going to add my footer. I'm going to come up here to my header. I'm going to get rid of this paragraph tag that it automatically put there. I'm going to highlight this, and in the property inspector, I'm going to do an H1. And the same thing down here with my project list. I'm going to make that an H2. Now let's click back, highlight that. And then I'm going to add an unordered list, or what we think of as bullets, for these projects. So after I have all of this text, I'm going to save it. I'm going to hit Design so we can see what it looks like. I'm going to go back to split view. Now we're going to add some CSS. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click down here on Container because I want to control that box. So I'm going to go over here to the CSS Designer panel. I'm going to keep pulling it so I have a two-column layout here. And up here, if you don't see that, make sure you go to Window and have CSS Designer. This is different than previous versions of Dreamweaver. There used to be a thing called the CSS Styles menu, which was very helpful if you've used Dreamweaver for years. Supposedly this new tool called the CSS Designer is better for beginners, for people who've used Dreamweaver before. It can be frustrating because it is a bit different. So I make sure that all the other panels are closed. So for instance, if you have files open, I do that. So let's go back, go to Container. First thing I do is I hit the plus, and I want to create a style sheet the first time I do this. So I'm going to put this in my styles folder. I'm going to hit save. Make sure it's on the link. And there it goes. And I can see it show up here. And if I click on it, so far it's blank. So I'm going to go back to source code and click back on container. And this is where I can click on the CSS, media, when you're new, you won't be messing with this. And even with sources, when you get more advanced, you might have multiple style sheets. When you're brand new, typically you're only going to have one. Media is if you want to have different styles, for instance, for print-based or for mobile devices. Right now, we're not messing with any of that. So under selectors, you want to hit plus, and it tries to figure out based on what you have selected what you want to do. So it's pretty good there. I'm going to click over here to the right, and then I'm going to go up to here, and you'll notice that there's these different options you can click on, but basically they're all the same here. You just can scroll all the way down, or you can jump over to certain things. So I'm going to start here, and I'm going to start with my width. I'm going to do 960. I'm going to you'll notice that because I'm new to this myself, that I still find myself scrolling past things that in the past I wouldn't have done. So for the container, I want to add a little bit of a margin around the whole thing. And that's it for now. Now I'm going to go over to body tag. So I have body selected, make sure 502. Hit plus, and see how now it pulls in the paragraph tag. I don't want that, I just want the body tag. So this is where for the whole page I can decide on the font that I want to use. I can decide on lots of things. So I'm going to first start with font. Traditional wisdom is that you're better off using a sans serif font like Arial or Helvetica for screen reading, so I'm going to go with that. I'm going to choose a color from my font. In this case, I know the color I want to use. And then I'm going to choose a background color. Once again, in this case, I know the color I want to use. Let me actually pull it over here so I can see it. Okay. Go back. I'm going to save it all. I'm going to hit cancel. I meant to just do a save. And see, when you do save all, it should get both. Alright, there we go. And so I'm going to just show you so far. We're getting there. So now we're going to go and add a background color for each one of the HTML5 tags. So we're going to start here. We're going to click on header. Once again, 502, hit the plus sign. This is where I'm going to start with my font color. So in this case, I know the color I want to use. Let's try that once more. Okay, I'm going to change my font type here to Verdanda, and you'll notice if I go over here to my CSS that it does it in an order that I actually want Verdanda to be the first one, and it has multiple here because it doesn't know what is going to be on the person's computer, so it tries to give a number of alternative fonts, but the first one is the one that it's going to go for. Okay, let's do a background color now. I'm going to do a CC9. Let's try that once more. So now I'm going to go down, click over here, make sure section. In section, I'm going to do background color. Alright, and you notice that the font is a little off, so it's not giving me the contrast I want, but for now that's fine. We'll fix that in just a minute. I'm going to go down to footer, and for footer, so let's take a look over here. You'll see that what it did was it didn't actually add a section tag. So this is where I can do undo, and it actually worked out pretty good. So let's try to do that once more. So we're going to hit plus sign, and that's the step I think I forgot. Meaning to do background color. Let's see how that looks. Okay, much better. We still have the contrast issue. And right now I'm going to actually leave the footer this same color. So I'm going to do something a little different than this in this example. Basically, you see down here, it isn't the same color because the footer's usually that text at the very bottom, almost like a commercial, where it's one of those things that you don't necessarily want people to notice right away. It should be very subtle. Okay. So now let's take a look at section, and let's add a color, font color. And so what you can always do too is you can always type right over here. Actually, okay, let me look over here at my notes. Okay, so now I'm going to go through here and I'm going to change my font size of my footer because I usually want that smaller. So I just jump over here, go down to font size, make sure pixels, and I'm going to choose text align in the middle. Don't really center a lot of things, but down here often I will with my footer text. So I'm going to do a couple more things here. I'm going to go start back at the header, and sometimes you can be more methodical and finish one section and move on. I often just jump around. So I'm going to go down here, and in this case I missed it. I want to go to padding, and I want to add, I'll add 5 pixels at the top, 10 at the bottom, 10 at the left, and 10 at the right. In this case, the only border, or not border, the only margin I want to have 10 pixels. I'll do 5 actually at the bottom. So I want to make sure I have this space between these two. So I'm going to click on section, make sure it's selected here, and that's where you can kind of run into problems when you notice that you're not being consistent. So you always want to check, alright, it's the 502, it's my section tag, that looks good. So once again, my padding, I'm going to add 10 pixels all the way around. And then I'm going to add a margin of 5 at the top, margin of 5 at the bottom. Now I'm going to go down here to my footer. Once again, make sure your source is selected, your tag is selected. In this case, just to follow good form, I'm going to add a top margin 10 pixels padding. That is, I don't need left or right because it's centered. And I'm going to add 5 pixel margin. So now let's save all. Let's preview in Safari. So you can see that we have this break here, and if you wanted more space, we could take a look and see. You can see the padding. So there's a little more space below and above, so that could be tweaked, and you can see the footer down here. So if we look at the example, real similar. It actually has a border radius around that, and so there's a couple things that are different. In that example, it actually has this text down in this section. So that's where I could take this text, bring it down here in my section tag. Then I'm going to put my cursor in here. I'm going to go to the header, and where it had 5 above, 5 below, I'm going to go with 0 above, and I'm going to go 5 here. And I'm going to actually change that to 10 pixels to give more of a margin. Let's make sure that looked right. And if you're ever not sure, just hop over and look at your code. Scroll over to your header, make some room. Alright, so I said margin, the bottom should actually be 10. So far that looks pretty good. So now I can also go here, and as long as header is selected, in the example, there's a border radius. So this is where I could go over here and make a real subtle border radius. I'm going to save all. So you can't tell, but if I go to live view, you can see there it is. You can see that, all right, the spacing isn't quite right above and below, so that's something I can always be careful with live view though, because when it's on, you'll notice you can't do anything. So you got to deselect that, go back to split, and so with my padding, I'm going to add 5 pixels back. Let's see what that looks like. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to save all. So there's a couple more things to do here. One of them is I want to add a class to make each one of these blue. So let's take a look at the example. Notice how each one of these projects are blue. So let's do that. So to add a class, I'm going to go over here, I'm going to select my source, I'm going to hit plus, and I have to name the class. So I'm going to call this blue text. You always start with a period, and you want to have no spaces. Generally, make sure it's lowercase. And then when I come over here, I'm going to click on the little text icon, and I'm going to select here, and I'm going to select a blue. I'm going to just pretend for now that's fine. And I could go down here to font weight and say bold. Okay. So now if I go over here, I can see there it is. But nothing's happened over here because I have to actually apply it. So now if I highlight that, let's actually close this a little more. Let's make sure, see, we're in live mode. And that's everything starts to get funky when you're live mode. So a lot of times I just avoid live mode. But if I highlight it, down here in Property Inspector, if I select CSS, I can go down here and I'll see blue text. And if you want to see what it did, let's make some space. What it did is it added a span tag with a class equals blue text and then closing span tag. So with that, you could, by hand, you could add these, right? So I could add a span tag and wherever I want it to end. And if I add a space, I can always add type class, and then if there was more than one, it would list it. So you could do it that way for sure. So there's lots of ways that you can do it. Using CSS down here in the Property Inspector can get tricky if you don't know what you're doing, because you'll find yourself clicking things and it's adding things to, it's basically adding styles to your style sheet, and often to a place where you don't expect it. So a lot of times people recommend avoiding using this down here, but this is the way that I'll often do a class. So I create the class first, then I apply it. And the difference is an ID is something you use once. A class is something like here where you're going to use more than once on a page. So something to keep in mind, and some people say this is going to go away, but especially for those who might have used Dreamweaver before, the CSS styles panel will show up in one way. If I go down here, so I have CSS styles here, and if I hit edit rule, the old CSS styles panel pops up. So this is something that for those of us like myself who've used Dreamweaver for a long time, we really love seeing this. Supposedly it's going to go away. So, but that is one way that you'll definitely notice that you can still find that if that's something that's comfortable for. And so here I can go over here and I can highlight this. Right here, targeted rule went to section. And that's good, but if it didn't, that's where the problem becomes. But I'm just going to go ahead and add HTML strong tag here instead of using CSS. And then this example, you'll see that this text is red too. And so if you actually look at the style sheet, and remember you can always right click, look at the code. It basically created a ID equals name, and that's because it's only going to be done once, and then it had this font. So why don't we go ahead and do that just so you can see the process. So if I want to make this red, and it's the only time I want to make it red, so in this case I actually added red to the H1 style. In this case I just want to basically create a div or a span tag. So I'm going to add a div tag around this. And there I must have chopped off something. I put the div tag in the wrong place. Notice how Dreamweaver tries to help you. Okay. So now I have this div tag. And so what I can do over here, I'm going to actually call this, I'm going to keep the pound sign, but I'm going to call this name. And notice how it's an ID just like here. It looks just like your container. The text, I copied that in. Did not apply that, but what we can do, right, is first make sure it's there. Name is. I never use the property inspector, but see if it shows up. It does not. But the way that I normally would do this, go over here, ID equals name. So let's save this and let's take a look. So just like that, we took a basic HTML file and we used a few different HTML principles to create this page. The next steps always would be you want to check your code to see if it validates. Ideally use one of the validation websites to check both your HTML5 and your CSS. But while you're working on your page, you can always come down here and validate in Dreamweaver just to see if you've made any errors. So down here it says I have an error at line 17, which is great to see. Let's see what it's upset with. And it's upset with this paragraph tag. Notice how here it goes div paragraph and here it goes div paragraph. It wants the paragraph tag on the other side. Alright, so now save all, validate. Okay, no errors found. So once I upload, and especially if I add any images like a validation badge, you want to always check again and see how this validates. But hopefully this gives you a basic idea how to use cascading style sheets and specifically the CSS designer in Dreamweaver CC. Thanks.